In the hushed silence of a billionaire's funeral, one desperate voice shatters the carefully constructed facade of Newport's most powerful family. "She's not dead!" A homeless man, clutching a tattered yellow coat, is dragged away as cameras flash and the elite exchange nervous glances. But what if he's right? Lucy Wycliffe was declared dead 7 months ago, her body recovered from the lake at her father's estate. Now, as secrets begin to surface and family loyalties crumble, the question haunts Newport society. What really happened to the deaf middle child of oil tycoon Mason Wycliffe? And why would a father fake his own daughter's death? Follow the shocking story of a family built on lies, a sister erased from existence, and the unlikely heroes fighting to bring her back into the light. Some truths are buried so deep that even death cannot hide them. Don't miss a single moment of this heartbreaking journey to justice. Like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from to join the conversation about the families we choose and the secrets we don't. It was meant to be a silent funeral, the kind where wealth whispers instead of grief. Newport, Rhode Island's oldest cemetery, had never hosted such a parade of black Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, their tinted windows reflecting the autumn sun as they lined the narrow colonial road. Secret Service agents stood discreetly among the tombstones. 3 senators and a governor demanded such protocols. The media had been corralled behind velvet ropes, their cameras pointed toward the mahogany casket, worth more than what most Americans earned in a year. Mason Wycliffe was leaving the world exactly as he had occupied it, controlling the narrative. A giant of industry, the Wall Street Journal had called him that morning. Oil tycoon and philanthropist, read the scrolling Chiron on CNN. Ruthless bastard, whispered the cemetery groundskeeper to no one in particular. The mourners, if one could call them that, formed perfect rows of designer black. Women with statue-still faces, their Botox unmoved by the October wind. Men in bespoke suits, checking Apple Watches, mentally calculating what Mason's death meant for their stock portfolios. Colin Wycliffe, Mason's eldest son, stood nearest the casket, his posture military straight, eyes hidden behind Persol sunglasses. At 32, he was now the presumptive heir to Wycliffe Petroleum's empire. His sister Eleanor, 27, clutched a monogrammed handkerchief but had yet to use it. The absence between them, the space where another sibling should have stood, felt like a physical presence. Lucy Wycliffe, the middle child, dead 7 months prior in a drowning accident at the family's Lake Tahoe estate. A tragedy that had broken Mason, according to the carefully managed press releases. A father who had lost his special angel, the daughter few had ever seen. Father Tom, the family's personal chaplain who flew in from the Vatican for the occasion, raised his hands. The crowd hushed. Cameras zoomed. A chopper from MSNBC hovered distantly. "We gather to commend our brother Mason to God's merciful keeping. She's not dead!" The shout tore through the cemetery like lightning, electrifying the air. Heads whipped around, security hands flew to concealed weapons, and the governor's wife dropped her Chanel clutch. Through the crowd stumbled a man who seemed constructed from society's forgotten scraps. His clothes hung in tatters, patched together with what looked like garbage bags and duct tape. A wild, gray-streaked beard reached his chest, and beneath it a face weathered by elements and hardship. But his eyes, those eyes burned with an unsettling clarity. 2 security men moved immediately, their earpieces crackling with alerts. "She's alive!" the man screamed again, pointing a dirt-encrusted finger directly at the coffin. "Lucy's alive! I saw her yesterday wearing this." He thrust something yellow above his head, a tattered women's coat, once elegant but now stained and torn. The color still vibrant enough to be jarring against the monochromatic tableau of the funeral. The security guards seized him, one on each arm. A murmur rippled through the crowd. An elderly woman, Mason's sister from Boston, swayed and collapsed into her son's arms. "Get him out of here," Colin ordered, his voice controlled but thin with tension. "She was by the old train station," the homeless man continued as they dragged him backward. "Same yellow coat, same eyes, she's scared. Someone's keeping her." A third security guard clamped a hand over his mouth, muffling his desperate words. The man fought wildly, his eyes locked on Colin's face, pleading, urgent. Eleanor had gone completely white, her knuckles bloodless around her clutch purse. She took half a step forward, as if pulled by invisible strings, before catching herself. "Proceed, Father," Colin said, turning back to the chaplain. But for a fraction of a second, something flashed across his face. Recognition. Fear. It was gone before anyone could identify it. As the homeless man, whom locals knew only as Ray, was being forced into a police cruiser at the edge of the cemetery, Colin's mind was racing. That yellow coat. He'd seen it before. Not just on Lucy, but recently. Where? The service resumed. Prayers were said. Mason Wycliffe's casket was lowered into New England soil by 6 pallbearers who had never met him in life. And in the confusion, no one noticed when Eleanor slipped a small folded piece of paper into the pocket of one of the security guards. No one except for Colin, whose eyes missed nothing. His father had taught him that much, at least. As the final rose was tossed onto the gleaming casket lid, Detective Michael Santos watched from his unmarked car across the street. He'd arrested Ray a dozen times over the years. Public intoxication, trespassing, the usual homeless rap sheet. But something about today's outburst troubled him. Because 7 months ago, Santos had been the one to pull what was supposedly Lucy Wycliffe's body from the lake, and something hadn't felt right even then. He started his engine as the first raindrops began to fall, washing away the perfectly arranged roses on top of Mason's casket. In the police cruiser, Ray rocked back and forth, muttering the same words over and over. Yellow coat, hiding her, yellow coat, not dead. His fingers traced invisible patterns on the window glass, patterns that looked disturbingly like the American Sign Language symbol for help. The concrete floor of the holding cell felt like ice against Ray's palms as the officers shoved him inside. His body hit the ground with a dull thud that would leave bruises by morning, not that it mattered. Another mark among hundreds that mapped his 6 years on the streets of Newport. "Stay put, crazy man," sneered the younger officer, a rookie with a buzz cut and something to prove. "Maybe next time pick a better funeral to crash. That was a goddamn Wycliffe, you know." Ray didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that words were wasted on those who'd already decided what kind of person you were. Instead, he crawled to the corner of the cell, pulled his knees to his chest, and closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he could still see her, the girl with the hollow eyes and yellow coat, picking her way barefoot across the abandoned train tracks last Tuesday evening. The cell door clanged shut. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, painting the concrete room in a sickly pale glow. "You really outdid yourself this time, Raymond." Ray's eyes snapped open at the familiar voice. Detective Michael Santos stood on the other side of the bars, his weathered face a complex map of exhaustion and curiosity. Unlike the others, Santos never called him crazy, never treated him like garbage. Maybe because Santos remembered him from before, when Ray Ellison had been Professor Raymond Ellison, linguistics department chair at Brown University, before the accident that took his wife, his daughter, and eventually his mind. "Michael," Ray's voice cracked from disuse. "She's alive." Santos sighed, pulled up a metal folding chair and sat facing the cell. From his jacket pocket he produced a small silver flask. He took a swig before offering it through the bars. Ray accepted it with trembling hands. "Tell me everything," Santos said quietly. "Not for the record, just me." And so Ray told him how he'd been scavenging near the old Newport train station, the one closed since '97 when Amtrak rerouted the Northeast Corridor. How the evening fog had been rolling in from the harbor, thick enough to blur the edges of reality. How he'd heard footsteps on gravel, too light to be another homeless person or security guard. "She just appeared," Ray whispered, his fingers nervously tracing the outline of his beard. "Like she stepped out of the mist, barefoot, in that yellow coat, thin as paper. Her hair was different, chopped short, uneven, like someone cut it with garden shears. But it was her face, Santos. Same as the pictures they showed when she drowned." Santos leaned forward. "Did she say anything?" "That's the thing," Ray continued, his voice dropping lower. "She didn't speak. She just looked at me, like she was trying to recognize something. Her eyes were terrified, like an animal caught in a trap." He took another sip from the flask, the whiskey burning a path down his throat. "I tried to approach her, but she backed away. Then she reached into her pocket and dropped something. Before I could get to it, she vanished back into the fog, by the station's maintenance shed." "And what did she drop?" Santos asked, his pen now hovering over a small notepad. Ray reached into his filthy jacket and pulled out a crumpled receipt. It was just this, from some pharmacy in Warwick, dated 3 days ago. Santos took the receipt, studying it through narrowed eyes. Prescription for L. Wilson. Medications I've never heard of. L. Wilson, Ray repeated. Lucy Wycliffe, someone's hiding her, Santos, using a fake name. The detective's face revealed nothing, but his knuckles whitened around his pen. You know how this sounds, right? The Wycliffes could bury you for disrupting the funeral alone, let alone accusing them of… What exactly? I don't know, Ray admitted, but something's wrong. That family, there were always rumors about how they treated that girl. I remember faculty gossip from years ago, when Mason Wycliffe donated that wing to the linguistics department. Someone said his daughter was deaf, but he never allowed her to learn sign language properly, kept her hidden away. Outside the cell, someone cleared their throat. Both men turned to see a uniformed officer standing awkwardly in the doorway. Detective, there's someone here insisting on speaking with you about the incident at the cemetery. Santos stood, pocketing the receipt. He gave Ray a warning look. Sit tight. Don't tell anyone else about this. Ray nodded, sliding back against the cold wall as Santos left. Through the small window of his cell, he could see the clock on the wall, 6:42 p.m. Visiting hours at the station were over. Whoever had come was important enough to bypass protocol. Across town, in the cavernous master suite of the Wycliffe estate, Colin methodically searched through his father's personal safe. The funeral reception continued downstairs. Politicians, business partners, and social climbers picking at catered hors d'oeuvres while pretending to mourn. The safe's contents were disappointingly ordinary. Property deeds, stock certificates, the expected documentation of obscene wealth. But behind a folder of offshore account information, his fingers found something unexpected. A small leather-bound book, Lucy's journal. His heart hammered against his ribs as he opened it. Most pages contained childish drawings. Lucy had never been encouraged to develop her writing skills. Mason had deemed them unnecessary for someone like her. The last entry was dated April 17th, 1 week after her supposed drowning. Scrawled in uneven, determined letters was a single line. Dad, please stop hiding me. Colin's blood ran cold. He snapped the journal shut when he heard footsteps approaching down the hallway. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her funeral dress exchanged for casual black pants and a sweater. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. What are you doing in Dad's room? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. Colin slipped the journal into his suit pocket. Just making sure all his affairs are in order before the lawyers descend tomorrow. Eleanor's gaze lingered on his pocket, but she said nothing. Instead, she twisted the silver bracelet on her wrist. Their mother's bracelet, the one she'd started wearing only after Lucy's death. That homeless man, she said finally. The yellow coat he had. What about it? Colin kept his voice level. Eleanor turned away, her shoulders rigid. Nothing. It just looked like Lucy's coat, Colin finished for her. The one Mom gave her for her 16th birthday. The one that was supposedly lost with her at the lake. His sister's hand trembled slightly as she gripped the doorframe. Eleanor, Colin said softly, dangerously. What do you know? But Eleanor was already walking away, her footsteps quickening down the hall. As she turned the corner, Colin noticed something he'd missed during the funeral. A small, fresh cut on the back of her right hand. The exact same place where Lucy always used to nervously scratch herself when she was afraid. The sun had barely risen over Newport when Ray was released from the holding cell, courtesy of Detective Santos pulling strings with the desk sergeant. The morning air carried the sharp bite of salt from the harbor and the promise of another chilly October day. Ray stood on the police station steps, disoriented by freedom and lack of sleep, when a familiar whine caught his attention. Lucky, the scraggly mutt, a border collie mix with one blue eye and one brown, bounded up the steps, nearly knocking Ray over in his enthusiasm. Behind the dog, an elderly woman with steel-grey hair approached, leaning on a wooden cane. Mrs. Abernathy, Ray nodded respectfully. Martha Abernathy, owner of the only laundromat in town that didn't chase Ray away when he needed warmth on winter nights, had been caring for Lucky whenever Ray found himself in a cell. 3 times this month, Raymond, she scolded, though her eyes were kind. What was it this time? Ray knelt to scratch behind Lucky's ears, finding comfort in the dog's unwavering devotion. I saw her, Martha. The missing Wycliffe girl. Mrs. Abernathy's expression darkened. She glanced around before lowering her voice. Not here, she muttered, pressing a paper bag into his hands. Sandwich, coffee in the thermos, and Lucky found something you should see. Ray peered into the bag and found tucked beside the wrapped sandwich a small torn piece of yellow fabric. Lucky was digging by the station maintenance shed, Mrs. Abernathy explained. Same place you mentioned to me last week. There's something not right about this whole business. Ray felt a surge of validation. I need to go back there, now. Mrs. Abernathy nodded, her arthritis-gnarled fingers squeezing his arm. Be careful, Raymond. Those Wycliffes own half this town and the police in it. She glanced meaningfully toward the station behind them. Even the good ones have price tags. As she hobbled away, Ray tucked the fabric into his pocket and whistled for Lucky. They had a train station to investigate. The Wycliffe estate sprawled across 23 acres of Newport's most coveted oceanfront property, a monument to old money and new arrogance. In the East Wing, where morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, Eleanor sat motionless at her vanity. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, betraying a sleepless night. Her right hand absently traced the fresh cut on her left, a nervous habit she'd developed in childhood, mirroring her sister's self-soothing behavior. A soft knock at the door broke her trance. "Come in," she called, quickly pulling her sleeve down to cover the cut. Colin entered, already dressed in a crisp button-down and slacks despite the early hour. He carried 2 steaming mugs of coffee and an expression that suggested pleasantries weren't on the agenda. "We need to talk about Lucy," he said without preamble, setting one mug before her. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the coffee. "What about her?" "She's gone, Colin." "Is she?" Colin extracted Lucy's journal from his pocket and placed it on the vanity. "Because this suggests otherwise." Eleanor stared at the journal, her face draining of color. "Where did you find that?" "Dad's safe. Last entry dated a week after her drowning." "Care to explain?" A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. Eleanor seemed to age before Colin's eyes, her shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. "You don't understand what it was like," she finally whispered. "What he did to her." Colin pulled up a chair, sitting so they were eye to eye. "Then tell me. Everything." Eleanor took a deep, shuddering breath. "Lucy was born with profound hearing loss. You know that much. But what the world doesn't know is that Dad saw it as a stain on the Wycliffe bloodline, a defect to be hidden away. She had tutors," Colin countered. "Private instruction." Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Is that what you were told?" "God, Colin, you were already at boarding school when she was born. You only saw what Dad wanted you to see during holidays and staged family photos." She stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Lucy never had proper education. Those tutors were there to teach her to behave, to be invisible. Dad wouldn't even let her learn sign language properly because he thought her gestures looked undignified in public. He kept her medicated, docile. When neighbors asked questions, he invented allergies, sensitivities, conditions that required her to stay home." Colin's mind raced back through fragmented memories. Lucy's absence at family functions, the way she'd flinch when their father entered a room, the strange glassy look in her eyes at Christmas dinner. "Mrs. Lowry from next door," Colin said slowly, recalling the elderly neighbor who'd lived beside their childhood home. "She used to say Lucy was Mason's shame. I thought she was just a bitter old woman." "Mrs. Lowry tried to help," Eleanor confirmed. "She taught Lucy some basic signs through the garden fence when Dad was away. Then suddenly Mrs. Lowry moved to Florida, never even said goodbye." Colin felt sick. "And the drowning? What really happened?" Eleanor turned back to him, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I don't know exactly. Lucy had been getting worse, more depressed, more withdrawn. Mum was falling apart watching it happen. I gave Lucy my old yellow coat, something cheerful, something Dad didn't control. Then one night there was shouting. Dad came home drunk, furious about some business deal. He went to Lucy's room. She trailed off, her hands twisting together. The next morning, Dad announced she'd snuck out and drowned in the lake. There was a private funeral, closed casket, no autopsy. And you believed him?" Colin's voice rose in disbelief. "I didn't know what to believe," Eleanor cried. "But last month I thought I saw her, just for a second, outside the gates, in that yellow coat. I told myself I was imagining things, seeing what I wanted to see." Before Colin could respond, his phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Professor Ellison knows more than you think. Old train station, 10 a.m. Colin stared at the message, then back at his sister. "Who's Professor Ellison?" Eleanor looked confused. "I don't know, but, Colin, there's something else." She reached into her desk drawer and removed a small silver key. This was in the coat pocket when I gave it to Lucy. I found a duplicate hidden in Mum's jewelry box after Lucy died. I think it opens something important. Colin took the key, examining its unusual teeth. Not a house key. Something else. I need to find this professor, he decided, pocketing both the key and journal. And you need to visit Mom at the clinic. See if she knows anything about this. As Colin left, Eleanor called after him. Colin, if she is alive, what does that make us? What did we let happen to our own sister? The question hung in the air, unanswered and damning. At the abandoned Newport train station, Ray and Lucky carefully picked their way through overgrown tracks and crumbling platforms. The maintenance shed stood like a weathered sentinel at the far end, its red paint peeling to reveal grey wood beneath. Lucky suddenly froze, his ears perked forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Ray whispered, scanning the area. The dog's attention was fixed on something behind the shed. Ray approached cautiously, heart pounding. As he rounded the corner, he saw it. A fresh boot print in the mud, too large to be Lucy's. Someone else had been here watching, and whoever it was had dropped something in their haste to leave, a crumpled business card for Coastal Heights Psychiatric Facility, with a handwritten note on the back. Patient transfer complete. Protocol silence in effect. Colin Wycliffe's BMW crawled through Newport's narrow streets, its tinted windows concealing him from curious onlookers still buzzing about his father's funeral. The navigation system announced his arrival at his destination, a modest Cape Cod-style house 3 miles from the abandoned train station. According to Detective Santos's reluctant information, this was the former residence of Professor Raymond Ellison, linguistics expert, and now, inexplicably, the homeless man from his father's funeral. The academic part made sense. Lucy had been deaf. Language would have been her greatest challenge. But why would a respected professor end up on the streets? And what connection could he possibly have to Lucy? Colin checked his watch. 9:47 a.m. He was early for the mysterious meeting. Time enough to do some reconnaissance. The house appeared empty, slightly neglected but not abandoned. Colin approached cautiously, peering through a dusty window. The interior was frozen in time. Books still lined shelves, furniture arranged as if waiting for occupants who never returned. Through a layer of dust, he could make out framed photographs on the mantel. Academic achievements, a smiling woman, a young girl with braided hair. The side door was unlocked, suspicious in itself. Inside, the musty scent of disuse hung in the air. Colin moved silently through the kitchen, noting unwashed mugs in the sink. Someone had been here recently. He followed a narrow hallway adorned with linguistics conference posters to what appeared to be a home office. A stack of folders sat on the desk, each labeled with academic jargon. But one stood out, Wycliffe L. Auditory Processing Assessment. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside were clinical notes, hearing tests, and a DVD labeled Session 12. Colin slipped the disc into an ancient-looking laptop on the desk. After a moment of whirring protest, the screen flickered to life. The video showed the Wycliffe Estate Gardens. The timestamp indicated 7 years ago. Lucy would have been 13. She sat on a stone bench, wearing a pale blue dress, her long blonde hair neatly braided. A younger Mason Wycliffe stood nearby, his posture rigid with impatience. Professor Ellison's voice came from behind the camera. "Lucy, let's try again. Feel the vibrations in your throat as you make the sounds." Lucy nodded, her eyes earnest with concentration. She began to vocalize, halting, imperfect attempts at singing Amazing Grace. The sound was haunting, disconnected from rhythm yet filled with raw emotion. Mason stepped forward, his face darkening. "Enough. This is pointless. She sounds retarded." The professor's voice sharpened. "Mr. Wycliffe, please. Lucy is making remarkable progress. Her pitch recognition through vibration is exceptional. I didn't hire you to teach her party tricks," Mason snapped. "Fix her speech, make her normal, or don't come back." The camera shook slightly, as if the person holding it had flinched. It panned to Lucy, who had shrunk into herself, eyes downcast. Then Mason turned to Lucy, not realizing he was in frame, and spoke words that sent ice through Colin's veins. "You won't leave this house until you can speak properly. Do you understand? You're an embarrassment. A Wycliffe doesn't make those animal noises." Lucy's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded mechanically. The camera jerked, then steadied, capturing Mason as he walked away. Then Professor Ellison moved into frame, kneeling before Lucy. He signed something to her. Quick, furtive gestures. Lucy's face transformed with a flash of hope. She signed back, her hands moving with surprising fluidity. The video ended abruptly. Colin sat frozen, nausea rising in his throat. He'd known his father was controlling, demanding, even cruel in his pursuit of perfection. But this was monstrous. A noise from the front of the house jolted him back to the present. He quickly pocketed the DVD and moved toward the hallway. Detective Santos stood in the living room, his weathered face grim. "Breaking and entering, Mr. Wycliffe. Not exactly keeping a low profile." "Door was open," Colin replied, not bothering with pretense. "Where's Ellison?" "Professor Ellison is meeting us at the train station," Santos said. "I figured you'd come here first. Curiosity's the family trait, isn't it?" The detective's eyes darted to Colin's pocket, where the DVD case made a slight bulge. He said nothing, merely nodded toward the door. "Shall we?" The abandoned Newport station looked even more desolate in daylight. Rust consumed the tracks like a slow disease, and pigeons roosted in the collapsed section of the Victorian-era roof. Ray Ellison waited on a crumbling platform, a nervous border collie mix circling his legs. "Mr. Wycliffe," Ray acknowledged, his voice steadier than it had been at the funeral. In daylight, away from the chaos, Colin could see the ghost of the professor in this man's posture and articulation. "Professor?" Colin nodded. "You said you saw my sister." "I did," Ray confirmed. "But first, I need to know if you're here as her brother or as Mason's son." The question caught Colin off guard. "What's the difference?" "Everything," Ray said simply. "Mason wanted to erase Lucy's disability, to remake her into something she wasn't. A brother would want to find her as she is." Colin thought of the video, of his father's cruel words. "I want to find my sister," he said firmly, "and I want to know what happened to her." Something in his tone must have convinced Ray, who nodded and withdrew the business card he'd found. "Coastal Heights Psychiatric Facility. It's a private institution across the state line in Connecticut. Very exclusive, very secretive." Santos examined the card. "Protocol silence? What the hell does that mean?" "It means keeping someone quiet," Ray said grimly. "Literally and figuratively." "How did you get involved with my sister?" Colin asked. "The video in your house." Ray's eyes clouded with memory. "Mason hired me to fix Lucy's speech. I specialized in language acquisition in deaf children. But when I met Lucy, I realized she didn't need fixing. She needed communication tools. Real sign language, not the modified, restricted version Mason allowed." He looked away, watching his dog sniff around the maintenance shed. "I taught her in secret. She was brilliant, absorbing ASL at an astonishing rate. She loved music, could feel rhythms and vibrations. She was writing poetry by 14. "So what happened?" Santos pressed. "How did you end up?" He gestured vaguely at Ray's disheveled state. Ray's expression darkened. "My wife and daughter were killed in a car accident on the Newport Bridge. Brake failure, they said. 2 weeks after I filed a report with Child Protective Services about Lucy." The implication hung heavy in the air. "You think my father—" Colin couldn't finish the sentence. Ray shrugged, his eyes hollow. "I can't prove anything. The investigation found nothing suspicious. But the timing. And afterward, I couldn't function. Lost my job, my house eventually. Started drinking. By the time I pulled myself together enough to check on Lucy, the Wycliffes had moved to the new estate, and she was completely inaccessible. Until you saw her here," Colin finished. Ray nodded, leading them toward the maintenance shed. "She dropped this." He pulled out the pharmacy receipt, and Lucky found fabric from her coat buried here. The three men stood silently for a moment, the weight of implication settling over them like the gathering storm clouds above. "If she's at Coastal Heights," Santos said finally, "we need a plan. We can't just walk in and demand to see her." "Actually," Colin said, pulling out his phone, "I think we can. The Wycliffe name still opens doors, even ones that should stay closed. The Coastal Pines Wellness Center looked nothing like the institutional nightmare Ray had imagined. Nestled among manicured gardens and towering pines, the Connecticut facility resembled a luxury resort more than a psychiatric hospital. Tasteful signs directed visitors to valet parking, and the lobby featured expensive abstract art and a burbling marble fountain. This was where the wealthy hid their inconvenient relatives. Colin approached the reception desk with practiced authority, Ray and Detective Santos hanging back as planned. Despite his unshaven face and rumpled clothes, He hadn't changed since the funeral. Colin carried himself with the unmistakable confidence of extreme wealth. Colin Wycliffe, for Dr. Whitaker, he announced, not asked. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly at his name. Mr. Wycliffe, we weren't expecting— My father's passing has accelerated our timeline, Colin interrupted smoothly. Dr. Whitaker will understand. The receptionist nodded, reaching for the phone. Of course, please have a seat. I'll let him know you're here. Colin turned away, giving Santos a subtle nod. The detective casually moved to examine a large framed photograph of the facility's grounds, positioning himself to overhear the receptionist's call. Ray remained near the entrance, looking wildly out of place in his shabby clothes. His presence was a calculated risk. If Lucy was indeed here, he might be the only face she would recognize as trustworthy. 5 minutes passed in tense silence. Then a side door opened, revealing a tall, silver-haired man in an immaculate white coat. His smile was professionally warm, his eyes calculating behind designer frames. Mr. Wycliffe, what an unexpected pleasure. I'm Dr. James Whitaker. He extended a manicured hand. Please accept my condolences regarding your father. He was a generous benefactor to our research department. Colin shook the offered hand, noting the expensive watch on Whitaker's wrist. Thank you, Doctor. I'd like to discuss patient LW. A flicker of tension crossed Whitaker's face, quickly masked. Perhaps we should speak in my office. These are my associates, Colin gestured to Santos and Ray. They'll be joining us. Whitaker's eyes narrowed slightly at Ray's disheveled appearance. I'm afraid hospital policy limits confidential patient discussions to family and legal representatives. Detective Santos is handling security matters for the estate, Colin said smoothly, and Professor Ellison was my father's consultant regarding LW's special needs. The title Professor visibly changed Whitaker's assessment of Ray. He nodded reluctantly. Very well. This way, gentlemen. They followed him through a key-carded door into a corridor far less decorative than the lobby. The soft music and aromatherapy scents gave way to antiseptic efficiency. Muted beige walls, numbered doors, and surveillance cameras at regular intervals. Whitaker's office continued the facade of luxury, with leather furniture and medical credentials in gilded frames. He gestured for them to sit, taking his place behind an imposing desk. Now, how may I assist the Wycliffe family today? Colin leaned forward, eyes steady. I want to see my sister. Whitaker's expression didn't change, but his right hand moved subtly toward his desk drawer. I'm not sure I understand. Your sister Lucy tragically passed away last April. Cut the bullshit, Doctor, Colin said evenly. We know she's here, registered under the name L. Wilson. We know my father faked her death. What we don't know is why. The room crackled with tension. Whitaker's pleasant demeanor hardened into something more calculating. These are serious accusations, Mr. Wycliffe. Do you have evidence to support them? Ray pulled out the pharmacy receipt. Prescriptions for L. Wilson, matched to medications commonly used to manage patients with hearing impairments, filled at a pharmacy 3 miles from here. Santos added, a witness saw her at Newport Station last week. Yellow coat, matching the description of clothing she was last seen in. Circumstantial at best, Whitaker dismissed, though his eyes tracked the receipt with interest. Even if such a patient existed in our facility, I couldn't possibly confirm or deny without proper authorization. Colin reached into his pocket, removing the small silver key Eleanor had given him. Would this authorization help? My father always kept contingency plans, including access provisions for Lucy's care. It was a bluff, but the key was distinctive enough to be plausible. Whitaker stared at it, his professional composure cracking slightly. May I see that? Colin held it just out of reach. After you confirm my sister's presence here. The standoff lasted 10 long seconds before Whitaker sighed. Lucy Wycliffe is not a patient here. Ray started to protest, but Whitaker raised a hand. However, we do have a patient named Laura Wilson who was admitted 7 months ago. She matches your sister's general description, though I've never personally treated her. She's under the care of our specialist unit for individuals requiring discretion. I want to see her. Now. Colin's voice left no room for argument. Whitaker stood. I'll need to make some calls first. Changing established protocols requires— Santos cut him off. Doctor, I'll need to see your facility's registration logs and admission paperwork for Laura Wilson as part of an ongoing investigation. Investigation? Whitaker's eyebrows rose. Into what exactly? Potential identity fraud, false death reporting, and medical imprisonment, Santos improvised. Unless you'd prefer I return with a warrant and a team to search the premises? Whitaker's jaw tightened. That won't be necessary. Wait here. He left the office, closing the door firmly behind him. He's stalling, Ray muttered. Probably calling security or destroying evidence. Santos nodded grimly. We've got maybe 5 minutes before this gets complicated. He turned to Colin. What's your play here? If we find her, then what? Get her out, Colin said simply. Deal with the fallout later. Ray moved to the door, cracking it open to peer down the hallway. Clear for now, but we should... He froze, eyes fixed on something in the corridor. Without warning, he slipped out, ignoring Santos's hissed warning. Damn it, Santos muttered, drawing his service weapon. Stay here. Colin had no intention of staying anywhere. He followed Santos into the hallway to find Ray already at the far end, examining what appeared to be an empty medication cart. Ellison, get back here, Santos whispered urgently. Ray ignored him, rifling through the cart drawers until he found what he was looking for, a clipboard with patient medication schedules. His finger ran down the list until it stopped on one entry. Room 217, he said as they caught up. L. Wilson. Daily meds include diazepam and haloperidol. Heavy sedatives, Santos translated. Chemical restraints. Colin felt rage building in his chest. Where's 217? Ray pointed to a directional sign. East Wing, rooms 200, 230. They moved quickly down the corridor, Santos leading with his weapon discreetly at his side. The East Wing was quieter, more isolated. A small nursing station sat unmanned, a coffee cup still steaming on the desk. They're clearing staff, Santos realized. Whitaker's making sure no witnesses. Room 217 had a small observation window in the door. Colin peered in, his breath catching. The room was sparse, a bed, a desk, a chair. No decorations except for dozens of drawings pinned haphazardly to one wall. On the bed sat a thin young woman, her blonde hair chopped unevenly short. She rocked slightly, focused intently on drawing something on a pad of paper. Even from this distance there was no mistaking her features. Lucy, his sister. Stand back, Santos ordered, examining the electronic lock. He swiped a keycard he'd palmed from the nursing station. The light flashed red. Denied. Ray pushed forward. Let me try something. He knocked on the window. When Lucy looked up, he began to sign, hands moving in patterns Colin couldn't understand. To his amazement, Lucy stopped rocking. Her eyes widened. She approached the door cautiously, signing back with quick, agitated movements. She recognizes me, Ray said, his voice thick with emotion. She's asking if I'm really here or if it's the medication making her see things again. Colin felt his throat tighten. Tell her I'm here too. Her brother. Ray signed the message. Lucy peered through the window, her eyes finding Colin's. No recognition flickered there, just wariness and confusion. How do we get in? Santos demanded, eyeing the corridor nervously. Ray signed another question to Lucy. She responded by pointing to a vent near the floor of her room. The key, Ray translated. There's a key in the ventilation system. Eleanor gave it to her. A fluorescent light flickered overhead as Santos kept watch at the end of the corridor. Colin pressed his palms against the cold door of room 217, desperate for some connection with the sister who didn't recognize him. Inside, Lucy had dropped to her knees beside the ventilation grate, her thin fingers working to pry it open. How could Eleanor have gotten a key to her? Colin whispered. Ray continued signing to Lucy through the window. She says Eleanor visited once, pretending to be doing a charitable foundation tour. She slipped Lucy the yellow coat and the key during a moment when the nurses were distracted. Colin felt a confusing mix of emotions, pride in Eleanor's courage, shame at his own obliviousness, rage at what his family had become. But Lucy never used the key? Too many cameras. Ray translated Lucy's rapid signs. Too many orderlies. She was waiting for the right moment. A soft, metallic clatter came from inside as Lucy extracted something from behind the grate. A small silver key, twin to the one in Colin's pocket. She approached the door, sliding it beneath the narrow gap. Colin picked it up with trembling fingers. Where does it go? Lucy signed again, longer this time, her face intense with concentration. She says it's for a storage cabinet in the administrative section, Ray translated. Records are kept there, proof of what they did to her. Santos rejoined them, tension evident in every line of his body. Security's mobilizing. 2 guards just entered the west corridor. We need to move now. We can't leave her, Colin insisted. We won't, Santos assured him. But we need leverage, documentation, evidence. If we try to walk out with her now, they'll stop us and bury whatever paper trail exists. He turned to Lucy and signed awkwardly, clearly less fluent than Ray. We'll come back. Promise. Lucy's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, her gaze settling on Colin with a flicker of something. Not recognition, but perhaps hope. The 3 men moved swiftly back toward the main corridor, Ray memorizing their route while Santos checked for security. The administrative wing was marked by mahogany doors and carpet instead of the clinical linoleum of the patient areas. There, Ray pointed to a door labeled Records Archive. The silver key slid perfectly into the lock. Inside, industrial shelving held hundreds of manila folders and storage boxes. A computer terminal sat dark and idle in the corner. Santos, watch the door, Colin ordered, surprising himself with his commanding tone. Professor, help me find anything with Lucy's name or L. Wilson. They worked quickly, scanning labels and flipping through files. It was Ray who found it first, a red folder marked Project Echo, Subject LW. Here, he called softly, spreading the contents on a desk. The documents told a story more disturbing than anything Colin had imagined. Photos of Lucy sedated in a hospital bed, medical charts with medications and dosages, brain scans labeled before conditioning and after conditioning, a signed form authorizing experimental treatment for auditory processing recalibration, Mason Wycliffe's bold signature at the bottom. My God, Colin breathed. They were experimenting on her. Ray's face had gone ashen as he examined a document. This explains why she doesn't recognize you. These drugs, they're memory suppressants, powerful ones, combined with focused electrical stimulation of the temporal lobe. His voice cracked. They were trying to make her forget she was deaf, rewire her brain to process sound differently. Would that even work? Santos asked, horrified. No, Ray said flatly. It would just destroy her existing memories, her sense of self. It's not medicine. It's torture. Colin felt physically ill. My father authorized this? More than that, Ray said, turning a page. He funded it. $5 million to Dr. Whitaker's research foundation. A noise in the hallway silenced them. Footsteps approached, then passed. Colin quickly took photos of each document with his phone, while Ray continued reading, his expression growing darker. There's more, he said, voice hollow. Your father didn't just hide Lucy because she was deaf. He hid her because she knew something. Ray held up a transcription of an interview. Something about your mother's accident. Colin snatched the paper. His mother had died when he was 12. A fall down the grand staircase at their old estate. Ruled accidental. His father had remarried within a year. The transcription read, Dr. W, tell me again what you think you saw that night. Patient. Signs translated. Father pushed mother. From the top. I watched from my hiding place. Dr. W. And did you tell anyone at the time? Patient. Signs. Only Eleanor. She said we must never tell. Father would hurt us too. Dr. W. These are delusions, Lucy. Part of your condition. Your mother's death was an accident. This is why you need treatment. He killed my mother, Colin whispered, the world tilting beneath him, and then locked Lucy away because she witnessed it. The office door swung open. Eleanor stood there, her face pale and resolute. Behind her loomed 2 security guards. Eleanor? Colin gasped. What are you? I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. They followed me from Mother's clinic. I didn't know. Dr. Whitaker stepped past her, a thin smile on his lips. Mr. Wycliffe, this is an unfortunate situation. Trespassing, theft of confidential records, all criminal offenses. Not as criminal as what you've done to my sister, Colin snarled, clutching the red folder. Your father made the decisions regarding Lucy's care, Whitaker replied smoothly. Decisions you seemed content with until now. I didn't know. Didn't want to know, perhaps, Whitaker suggested. The Wycliffe family has always excelled at selective awareness. Eleanor stepped forward, pushing past Whitaker. I knew. I've always known. The room fell silent. Eleanor's hands trembled, but her voice steadied. I was 7 when Lucy was born. I remember how Father changed when the doctors confirmed her deafness, how Mother cried at night, how Lucy was hidden away whenever important people visited. She turned to Colin. You were already at boarding school. You didn't see it happening day by day. Why didn't you tell me? Colin demanded. Because Father made it clear what happened to those who spoke up, Eleanor said, tears streaming now. After Mother's accident, I understood the rules. Keep Lucy quiet, keep myself small, survive. She pulled something from her pocket, a worn photograph. Lucy and Eleanor as children sitting in the garden. Behind them, partially visible in a window, was a figure watching, their father. I tried once, Eleanor continued. Last year, I gave Lucy the coat, the key, told her about a friend who could help her escape, but I was too afraid to follow through. Her voice broke. I'm the reason she's here. After she ran, Father caught her at the train station, said she was delusional, dangerous, had her committed and declared dead to the world. Dr. Whitaker cleared his throat. This family drama is fascinating but ultimately irrelevant. Security, please escort these intruders out and confiscate that folder. Wait, Eleanor said, her voice suddenly stronger. She reached into her bag and withdrew a small recording device. Before you do anything, you should know I've just recorded your admission of imprisoning Lucy under a false identity. A recording that will go directly to the FBI if anything happens to us. Whitaker's confident expression faltered. You're bluffing. Try me, Eleanor challenged, a flash of the Whitecliffe steel finally showing in her spine. I've spent 20 years being invisible, Dr. Whitaker. You'd be surprised what people say when they forget you're in the room. The standoff stretched, tension crackling like electricity. Finally, Santos broke the silence. Here's what's going to happen, he said with calm authority. We're taking Lucy with us. All copies of her records come too. In return, no charges are filed against the facility. Yet, we walk out quietly. No scene. Whitaker's face hardened. And if I refuse? Then tomorrow's headline reads, Wycliffe heiress found alive, imprisoned by father's medical conspirators, Colin stated flatly. Your career, this facility, everything ends. Your choice, Doctor. The security guards exchanged uncomfortable glances. This was above their pay grade. After a long moment, Whitaker's shoulders sagged in defeat. Take her, but this isn't over. No, Colin agreed, gathering the documents. It's just beginning. Rain lashed against the windows of Detective Santos's cabin in the Rhode Island woods, 40 miles from Newport, and the prying eyes of the press. Inside, Lucy Wycliffe sat wrapped in a faded quilt, staring into the flames dancing in the stone fireplace. The yellow coat, now clean and mended by Eleanor's careful hands, hung on a peg by the door, a bright spot in the rustic interior. 3 days had passed since they'd walked out of Coastal Heights with Lucy between them. Dr. Whitaker's threats echoing behind them. 3 days of careful withdrawal from the cocktail of medications that had clouded her mind. 3 days of piecing together the fragments of her shattered memory. Ray sat across from Lucy, his hands moving in the graceful patterns of ASL. Despite his years on the streets, this part of him remained intact, the patient teacher, drawing responses from Lucy's increasingly confident signs. She remembers more today, Ray translated for the others. The fog is lifting, but there are still holes. Colin paced by the window, phone in hand. The storm had knocked out cell service, isolating them further, a mixed blessing. Outside, his BMW and Eleanor's Audi were hidden under tarps, leaves scattered over them for additional camouflage. Santos had insisted on these precautions. Men like your father don't let go of secrets easily, he'd warned. Even from the grave. Eleanor emerged from the small kitchen carrying mugs of tea. Her designer clothes had been exchanged for borrowed jeans and a flannel shirt, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The transformation was more than physical. Something in her demeanor had changed, a lifetime of careful composure giving way to determined focus. The neurologist friend of yours, she said to Santos. When will he get here? Dr. Patel should arrive tomorrow, weather permitting, Santos replied. She's bringing equipment to properly evaluate Lucy's condition. Lucy's eyes tracked their conversation, reading lips with the skill of someone who'd relied on it for survival. She signed something, quick and emphatic. She doesn't want more doctors, Ray translated. She says they always hurt, not help. Colin approached his sister cautiously, kneeling before her. Though they shared the same Wycliffe features, the distinctive blue eyes, the sharp cheekbones, Lucy appeared almost ethereal, as if the years of captivity had worn away everything but her essential self. No more hurting, he promised, speaking slowly and clearly for her to read his lips. Dr. Patel is different. She'll help us understand what they did to you so we can undo it. Lucy studied him intently before signing a response. She asks why you care now, Ray translated, his voice gentle. Where were you before? The question landed like a physical blow. Colin had asked himself the same thing countless times over the past days. Where had he been while his sister suffered, building his father's empire, playing the dutiful heir, looking away from uncomfortable truths? I didn't know, he said, the inadequacy of the words burning his throat. But that's no excuse. I should have seen, should have asked questions. Lucy's expression remained unreadable. She signed again. She says she remembers fragments of you, Ray translated. A Christmas when you gave her a music box. How confused you looked when she felt the vibrations instead of trying to listen. The memory surfaced in Colin's mind. Lucy at 10, pressing her fingertips to the lacquered wood of the jewelry box, her face alight with wonder as she experienced the music in her own way. He'd thought it strange at the time. Now he recognized it as beautiful. What else does she remember? Eleanor asked softly. Lucy's hands moved more tentatively now. The night your mother died, Ray translated, his expression solemn. She was hiding in the alcove by the stairs, her favorite spot to read by flashlight after bedtime. She saw your father and mother arguing at the top of the grand staircase. Eleanor sank into a chair, her face ashen. Though she'd suspected the truth for years, hearing it confirmed made it horrifyingly real. She says your mother had discovered financial documents, Ray continued. Something about illegal drilling, environmental violations. She was threatening to go public. Santos leaned forward, detective instincts engaged, despite his official recusal from the case. Did she see the actual moment? Lucy nodded, her eyes haunted. She signed a brief, devastating description. One push, Ray translated. Then silence. Then your father looking down at the body, adjusting his tie before calling for help. Colin felt physically ill. The father he'd admired, emulated, spent his life trying to please. A cold-blooded murderer. What do we do with this? He asked, voice hollow. The statute of limitations. There is none for murder, Santos interjected, but proving it, after all these years, with only Lucy's testimony, he let the challenge hang unspoken. Lucy signed again, more insistently. She says there was a video, Ray translated, surprise evident in his voice. Security cameras in the old house. Your father kept the footage. That's impossible, Eleanor objected. Father would have destroyed any evidence, unless he kept it as insurance, Colin realized, to hold over someone else involved. A sudden bang from the front porch startled them all. Santos drew his weapon, motioning for them to stay back. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. It's okay, he exhaled, opening the door. Lucky bounded in, shaking rainwater everywhere, followed by Mrs. Abernathy leaning heavily on her cane. The elderly woman surveyed the room with sharp eyes. Storm's getting worse, she announced. Roads will be flooded by morning. She fixed her gaze on Lucy. So this is the girl who wasn't dead. Lucy smiled, her first genuine smile since leaving the facility, and signed a greeting. She says thank you for helping Ray take care of Lucky. Eleanor translated this time, her own signing skills improving daily. Mrs. Abernathy nodded, satisfied. Dog like that deserves good care. She settled her creaking bones into the chair nearest the fire. Now who's going to tell me what our next move is? Because those men in the black SUV that passed my place twice today weren't just admiring the scenery. The room fell silent. Santos moved to the window, carefully parting the curtains to scan the darkness outside. What men? He demanded. When? First around noon, then again at dusk, Mrs. Abernathy replied. Government types, I'd wager. Or private security. Either way, they're looking for something. Or someone, Colin amended grimly. Whitaker must have connections. We need to leave, Eleanor decided. Tonight. Roads are washed out to the south, Mrs. Abernathy countered, and they'll be watching the highways. Lucy signed something, her movements sharp and determined. She says no more running, Ray translated. She says it's time to tell everyone. Eleanor paled. Lucy, the risk... But Lucy continued signing, her expression resolute. The world thinks I'm dead, Ray translated. As long as I'm a ghost, they control the story. I need to show my face, speak my truth. The simplicity and courage of it silenced them all. Lucy, who had been hidden away, medicated into compliance, erased from existence, wanted to step into the light. She's right, Colin realized. The only protection now is visibility, complete transparency. He turned to Santos. "We need to call a press conference, get every major network there." "They'll try to stop us," Eleanor warned. "Call us liars, say Lucy is mentally unstable." "Let them try," Colin's voice hardened. "We have the medical records, the proof of what they did to her, and by tomorrow we'll have Dr. Patel's evaluation backing us up." Lightning flashed, illuminating the determination on every face. In that moment of clarity, a plan formed. Dangerous, audacious, but necessary. Lucy signed once more, her movements deliberate. "Tomorrow," Ray translated. "The truth comes out tomorrow." None of them noticed the small red light blinking on Santos's supposedly secure satellite phone, the sign of an active connection, transmitting every word to unseen listeners. Morning broke over Newport with a crystalline clarity that followed the night storm, the October sun casting long shadows across the colonial architecture of the historic district. The steps of City Hall teemed with reporters, camera crews jostling for position, satellite trucks lining the adjacent streets. Word had spread like wildfire. Colin Wycliffe, newly minted heir to the Wycliffe fortune, had called an emergency press conference regarding revelations of profound public interest. Behind the imposing oak doors, Lucy Wycliffe stood before a mirror in a small anteroom, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back. Eleanor had helped style her choppy hair into something deliberately modern, rather than attempting to hide its institutional cut. She wore a simple blue dress that complemented her eyes. Wycliffe eyes, unmistakable to anyone who had seen the family photos splashed across business magazines for decades. The yellow coat hung over her shoulders like armor. Ray stood nearby, his transformation equally startling. A haircut, clean clothes, and a professional shave had restored echoes of Professor Ellison beneath the years of hardship. Lucky waited outside with Mrs. Abernathy, the dog having earned a place in their unlikely family circle. "Are you ready?" Ray signed, his movements carrying the gentle patience that had sustained Lucy through her darkest days. Lucy's hands trembled slightly as she responded. Scared, but ready. Across the room, Dr. Meera Patel reviewed her medical notes one final time. She had arrived at dawn, equipment in tow, and spent 3 intense hours evaluating Lucy's neurological condition. Her findings had left her professionally outraged. "The cognitive suppression protocol they used," she explained to Santos in a hushed tone. "It's experimental, dangerous, and completely unethical. They essentially created artificial dissociative barriers in her memory, chemical walls between her sense of self and her experiences." "Will she recover?" Santos asked, watching Lucy with concern. "With time, yes. She's already showing remarkable resilience. The human brain fights to heal itself." Dr. Patel's expression darkened. "But what they did to her, in any ethical medical community, it would be classified as torture." The door opened and Colin entered, his expression a careful mask of control. The past 24 hours had aged him visibly, new lines etched around his eyes, a certain innocence gone forever. "It's time," he said simply. "They're all out there, every major network." Eleanor took a steadying breath, smoothing her conservative black dress. "The board members? The shareholders?" "Front row, looking like they're attending their own funerals," Colin confirmed grimly. "Word of Lucy's existence has already tanked Wycliffe Petroleum stock by 12 points this morning." Detective Santos checked his watch. "NYPD found the safety deposit box exactly where you said, using the key from Eleanor. They're sending the contents now." As if on cue, Santos's phone chimed. He viewed the incoming message, then wordlessly passed it to Colin. "They found it," Colin confirmed, his voice tight. "Security footage from the old house. Date stamp matches the night of Mother's death." A heavy silence fell over the room. The final piece of evidence, preserved by their father's pathological need for control, the smoking gun that would destroy the Wycliffe legacy forever. Lucy approached Colin, her movements deliberately graceful despite the lingering effects of sedatives. She signed, her eyes intent on his face. "She asks if you're sure," Ray translated. "This will change everything." Colin met his sister's gaze directly. "The truth has already changed everything. All that remains is for the world to catch up." Lucy nodded, a subtle smile playing at her lips as she signed again. "She says you sound like Mother now," Ray interpreted softly. "Standing up for what's right, no matter the cost." The observation hit Colin like a physical blow. the first time anyone had compared him to his mother rather than his father. He found himself fighting unexpected tears. A knock at the door signaled the press secretary's 5-minute warning. "Let's go face the music," Santos said, bolstering his weapon beneath his jacket, a precaution that suddenly seemed less paranoid given the stakes. The group moved toward the main hall, Lucy between Eleanor and Colin, Ray and Dr. Patel following, Santos taking up the rear. The corridor seemed endless, their footsteps echoing against marble floors that had witnessed centuries of political drama, though perhaps none quite like this. As they approached the grand doors to the press room, a commotion erupted ahead. Raised voices, the thud of something heavy hitting the floor. Santos rushed forward, hand moving to his concealed weapon. The scene that greeted them froze everyone in place. Dr. Whitaker lay sprawled on the polished floor, blood trickling from his nose, his immaculate suit disheveled. Standing over him, breathing heavily with fists still clenched, was an elegant older woman in her 60s, silver hair swept into a perfect chignon. "Mother?" Eleanor gasped. Patricia Wycliffe, first wife of Mason, declared mentally incompetent and hidden away in a private care facility for over a decade, straightened her posture with regal dignity. "He tried to stop me," she stated calmly, nodding toward Whitaker. "Apparently my confused mental state made me a liability today." Lucy rushed forward, breaking away from the protective formation. Her hands flew in rapid signs as tears streamed down her face. Patricia responded in fluent ASL, her own eyes glistening as she embraced her daughter for the first time in 7 years. "You learned to sign," Eleanor whispered, watching the exchange in astonishment. "I've had nothing but time," Patricia replied, still holding Lucy close, "and a very dedicated nurse who smuggled in ASL textbooks against my treatment plan." Her voice hardened as she glanced down at Whitaker, who was being helped to his feet by security. "The same experts who managed my care also handled Lucy's. Mason's preferred solution for inconvenient women." Colin felt the final pieces click into place. "You weren't mentally ill." "My only illness was threatening to expose your father's environmental crimes," Patricia confirmed. "The same night he pushed me down those stairs. I survived, but the traumatic brain injury gave him the perfect excuse to have me declared incompetent. A much neater solution than murder. He'd already learned that lesson." Whitaker had regained his feet, dabbing at his bloodied nose with a monogrammed handkerchief. "These accusations are slanderous. Mrs. Wycliffe suffered a psychotic break after her accident." "Save it for your defense attorney," Santos interrupted, displaying his badge. "You'll need a good one." The press secretary appeared, visibly flustered by the unexpected addition to their carefully planned narrative. "Mr. Wycliffe, we're ready when you are, but the reporters are getting restless." Colin looked at his assembled family. The sister he'd failed to protect, the mother he'd been told was insane, the sister who'd carried secrets to protect them all, and the unlikely allies who'd helped expose the truth. The Wycliffe legacy of power built on cruelty and deception ended today. "We're ready," he confirmed. "All of us." The grand doors swung open. Camera flashes erupted like lightning, momentarily blinding in their intensity. Lucy flinched but steadied herself, the yellow coat bright against the sea of expectant faces. She had lived in shadows for so long, forced into silence, erased from existence. Now she would step into the light on her own terms. Eleanor squeezed her hand in silent support. Colin approached the podium, the weight of revelation settling on his shoulders. He cleared his throat, the microphones amplifying the sound throughout the packed chamber. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice gaining strength with each word. "Today, I introduce you to my sister, Lucy Wycliffe, very much alive despite reports of her death. Behind her apparent drowning and our father's elaborate cover-up lies a story of abuse, imprisonment, and criminal conspiracy that reaches to the highest levels of business and medicine in this country." The room erupted in chaos, shouted questions, frantic typing, cameras whirring. Through it all, Lucy stood tall, her gaze steady, finally visible to the world that had forgotten her. On the edge of the crowd, Ray watched with quiet pride, Lucky sitting faithfully at his feet. The homeless man who had shouted a truth no one wanted to hear, now vindicated beyond measure. "Sometimes," he murmured to the dog, "the most important voices are the ones society tries hardest to silence." Lucky tilted his head as if considering this wisdom, then gently nudged Ray's hand with his nose, a reminder that in this moment of triumph, the simplest connections remained the most profound. The story of Lucy Wycliffe reminds us that sometimes the most overlooked voices carry the most powerful truths. In a world blinded by wealth and influence, it took a man who had lost everything to see what others refused to acknowledge. Would you have the courage to speak up like Ray did, even when no one believes you? Or the strength to reclaim your identity like Lucy, after the world had already written your obituary? Family isn't always what it appears to be from the outside. Behind Newport's grand estates and polished appearances, the Wycliffes harbored dark secrets that nearly destroyed them. Yet in the end, it wasn't power or money that saved Lucy. It was connection, the yellow coat that linked her past to her future. The homeless professor who remembered her voice when she couldn't speak. The sister who finally found courage after years of silence. What secrets are we keeping that separate us from those we should protect? If this story touched your heart, please like and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that sometimes the most important people in our lives are those society tells us to ignore. Subscribe to hear more stories that challenge us to look beyond appearances and speak truth to power, no matter the cost. The yellow coat now hangs as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful act of love is simply seeing someone for who they truly are.